The Vikings were absolutely terrified of the night. They were some of the most savage, brutal raiders history has ever produced. And yet, they were so afraid that when someone in the family died, the body wasn't carried out through the front door. Instead, they smashed a hole straight through the wall, pushed the corpse out through the gap, and sealed it shut again behind it. They believed that if the body left through the door, it would remember the way back and return. Something out there in the dark frightened them more than any enemy army ever could, but that exact darkness they feared so deeply is the same place where a handful of scattered farmers turned themselves into the most feared people on the planet up at the top of the world. Winter doesn't just bring early sunsets. It practically wipes out the sun completely. Picture the sun disappearing in autumn and not truly returning until spring. And it wasn't only dark, it was lethal. Inland on a clear night, temperatures could fall past -30°C, more than 20 degrees below 0°, cold enough to kill a person before sunrise. So for half the year, an entire family was sealed inside one dark, smoky room while the night dragged on with no end in sight. And in that kind of darkness, stretched out that long, it becomes very easy to believe something is waiting outside. Something trying to get in. So they told stories. And the very first one explained exactly where all that darkness came from. They believed two massive wolves were chasing the sun across the sky, and that one day they would finally catch it, swallow it whole, and plunge the world into permanent darkness. Every winter, as the light drained away, it genuinely looked like the wolves were winning, but the wolves were only one of the threats out there. Beyond the firelight, the dark belonged to the trolls, enormous lumbering creatures, strong enough to crush a man. They ruled the night because the one thing a troll could never survive was daylight, Viking. First touch of the rising sun would turn it into solid stone. So when darkness fell, the smart ones stayed inside and waited it out. But you didn't even need to step outside to be in danger. The worst things came for you, indoors while you slept. They called it the Mara. It slipped into the house at night, sat on your chest while you slept, and crushed the air out of your lungs with terrible dreams. You couldn't move, you couldn't scream, you just woke up gasping in the dark. It's almost certainly what we now call sleep paralysis, that jolt of waking up frozen, convinced something is crouched on your chest. And Mara is exactly where the word nightmare comes from. One old tale claims a king of Sweden was crushed to death by a Mara in his sleep, sent by a witch who wanted him gone. And it didn't only target people. Farmers would find their horses in the morning drenched in sweat and trembling, their manes twisted into knots, but the Mara still wasn't the thing they feared most. That honor belonged to a dead body that climbed back out of its grave and walked. They called it a draugr, not a transparent ghost, but the actual corpse, swollen, rotting, and impossibly strong. It could crush a horse, and no living man could fight it off. The worst of them poisoned the land around them. In one saga, a draugr grew so foul that birds flying over its grave dropped dead out of the sky. Cattle died in the fields, and an entire valley had to be abandoned, and they rose at night. Worst of all, in the dead of winter. A bolted door wouldn't stop one. They could smash straight through a wall and drag you out into the dark. Remember that body shoved out through the hole in the wall? This is the dead man finding his way back home. To put a draugr down permanently, you had to dig up the grave, cut off its head, and burn the entire body to ash. The most infamous of them all was a dead shepherd named Glam, who climbed onto the roof of the farmhouse at night and rode it, slamming his heels against the beams until the whole house shook. Anyone who crossed his path outside either dropped dead instantly or lost their mind completely. It took a legendary outlaw named Grettir to finally wrestle him to the ground in the darkness. But as Glam lay dying, a cloud slid off the moon, and the light caught his rolling dead eyes. Grettir froze. With his final breath, Glam cursed him, swearing he would be afraid of the dark for the rest of his life. And the curse worked. Grettir, the very man who killed the monster, could never again bear to be alone in the dark, but not every Viking ran from the darkness. Some of them actually went looking for it. They had a name for it, utiseta, which simply means sitting out. A vulva, a woman the Vikings believed could see into the future, would walk out alone at night onto a burial mound and sit there in the freezing dark for hours, trying to wake the dead and drag secrets and prophecy out of them. People believed in it so completely that the law eventually banned the practice outright. naming it Sitting Out to Wake the Trolls. So while everyone else barricaded their doors against the dead, she was sitting alone on a grave in pitch-black darkness, trying to summon them. That same darkness, the very thing that terrified them most, is also exactly where they became unstoppable. Because when the fire burned high and the ale kept flowing, that same cramped room turned loud and wild, and they filled those long winter nights doing something that sounds shockingly modern. They had rap battles. They called it flighting, where two people stood up and hurled insults at each other back and forth in verse, made up on the spot. In the most legendary match of all, the trickster god Loki crashes a feast and tears into every single god in the room one by one. He even accuses Odin, the king of the gods, of practicing women's magic and sneaking around disguised as a witch. And they went straight for the throat. Your courage, your looks, whether you were even a real man at all. In a world where your reputation was the only thing you truly owned, freezing up with nothing to fire back could shame you for years. The Vikings respected a sharp tongue almost as much as a sharp blade. And once a year, all of it exploded into the biggest feast of the year. They called it Yule, the very same word we still use today. It stretched on for days, drowning in food and drink at the exact moment of year when food was hardest to come by. They sacrificed animals to the gods and marked the walls with blood to buy themselves a good year ahead. And at the height of it, a man would place his hand on a sacred boar and swear an oath out loud in front of the entire hall to win a certain battle or to kill a certain man. And once it was spoken, there was no taking it back. A hall full of warriors would talk themselves into next summer's raids in the dead of winter, months before a single ship ever touched water. The raids that terrorized all of Europe didn't begin out on the open sea. They began in the dark, around a fire with a cup of ale and a promise. But oaths alone were still just words. Something had to carry all those men across the open ocean and turn those words into blood and plunder. And the thing that actually did it is the last thing you'd ever guess. Picture a Viking longship. You probably imagine the wood, the carved dragon head, the long rows of oars. But the wood isn't what carried that ship across the sea. The sail did. And the sail was made of wool, which means without a room full of women spinning in the dark, there is no Viking age. Just angry men with axes stranded on the shore. A single sail could swallow the wool of more than 1,000 sheep. Every bit of it had to be cleaned, combed and spun into thread entirely by hand. Then it was woven into cloth on a loom taller than a person. When researchers calculated it all, the woodwork, the part everyone always pictures, turned out to be the easy part. The cloth alone took roughly 30 times longer to produce. And the slowest part wasn't even the weaving. It was the spinning. Spinning it all by hand was so painstakingly slow that added up. The sail for a single warship represented about 50 years of labor. No single person could ever finish that alone. It took dozens of women working together for years just to complete one. Indoors, in the dark, all winter long. It was so thoroughly women's work that the word spinster, which today simply means an unmarried woman, originally meant nothing more than a woman who spins. Strip away the longships and the legends, and what's left is something very ordinary. A room full of people huddled around a fire, afraid of the dark. That was the Vikings. Every single night. One of the most feared peoples in the world, quietly fighting their own fears, the same as anyone else,